Welcome to the Edge of NFT podcast with your hosts, Jeff Kelley, Eathan Janney, and Josh Kriger. We aim to bring you not only the top 1% of what's going on with NFTs today, but what will stand the test of time. We explore the nuts and bolts and the business side, but also the human element of how NFTs are changing the way we interact with the things that we love. This podcast is for the futurists and dreamers, the disruptors and creators, the fans and connectors, and the makers and doers that are pumped about this ecosystem and driving where it goes next.
Today's episode features Matt Sorg, Tech and Product Head of Gaming at Solana, the high-performance blockchain with smart contract functionality that provides faster transaction times and cheaper fees than Ethereum. After a long history in gaming, in 2017, Matt and a few colleagues at Riot started Koro, a gaming NFT marketplace and launcher. Through that experience, Matt recognized the importance of scaling blockchain solutions. Around May of last year, Matt started talking to Raj and Anatoly, co-founders of Solana, with the goal of collaborating on what a successful games ecosystem strategy would look like. After a thorough process of vetting the various blockchain scaling options, Matt joined the Solana team last year to lead the technical and product strategies around games. Matt, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here. Real excited about all this.
Awesome.
Yeah, Matt, super cool to have you. And this podcast focused on Solana has been a long time coming. There's definitely some NFT aficionados out there that live and breathe the Solana ecosystem, and we need to sort of dive in there. But maybe just to start things off, for our listeners that are less familiar, could you share the Solana origin story and how it currently serves the community, in particular around NFTs?
Yeah, I believe the official origin story has to do with some cup of coffee. Anatoly just dawned on him. He has this long history with Qualcomm and a bunch of other things around syncing cell phone services around cell phone towers and stuff. And so it just kind of dawned on him one day how you could sync blockchain activity and kind of the shared clock problem is a very big one in games in blockchain. And so figuring out how to do that in a decentralized way was kind of the start of it. And then there's a bunch of other lore around an underwater hockey league where half our co-founders came from, and a bunch of things around that. But the long story short is the idea is to make a very high performance blockchain. The proof of history is kind of the branded scalable solution, but there's about 8 things that were taken around bottlenecks in various different places. So even these aren't theoretical limits like that get posted. We can scale with hardware kind of arbitrarily. So it's because it's not just 4,000 transactions per second theoretical limit or whatever. We are hitting even upwards of 150,000 on test nets, and we've never had a full block at live. So that's kind of like where we are and kind of what we offer.
And how do you fit into this story? And I hear you guys have like a fun, pretty large office now in sort of Northern California.
Oh yeah. Well, so we're a very, very distributed team all around the world, and but the really cool things about the way our office works out is we've kind of pivoted them to being our in-person offices. To anybody can work there, including our ecosystem teams. So Phantom actually just works out of there, because many people don't necessarily realize this, but a lot of the companies that are kind of associated with Solana we don't own them or anything. It's just they're just ecosystem teams. So there's about 10 teams. Serum has been in and out of there, and Saber Network, like a bunch of protocols just kind of go in and work same office, like right next to myself and other people when we're there, but they don't have to be. It's just like kind of shared workspace for the ecosystems. Like very Web3. It's pretty awesome. But how I fit in, so there's the protocol, which is like our core competency is making this, very, very performant blockchain. And building on top of that, there's primitives, the NFT solutions and things like that. And so my role is making sure that those primitives are meeting the needs of various types of verticals, like the NFT kind of media, how to fix games, and also doing stuff with like DeFi payments, and just making sure that everybody is set up for success, like all the people building on top of Solana, and then communicating with our core engineering what is the next steps, kind of how do we evolve to meet the needs of the next evolution of how all this stuff fits together.
Yeah, man, I tell you, I don't know, Josh, I think we heard nonstop about Solana long before it really became kind of mainstream over the last couple of years, from Justin Wu and other people that are just banging on the door constantly. Solana, check it out. You got to understand what it's bringing to the table. And I mean, you guys have really just continued to deliver on your promises, which is so hard to do in the space. So very cool to live up to those high expectations, and really just getting started, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, very much so.
So Matt,
I mean, people don't realize this. We've only been minting NFTs for about 8 months now.
right, exactly.
And we've minted about, or not we, but like the ecosystem is minted around 8 million. So we're about and that's just accelerating. So it's
dude,
yeah,
it's bananas, man. It's bananas.
Yeah.
Like, so we're all about NFTs over here, and we always like to ask folks, like, what was your first exposure to NFTs, and was it like an immediate thing where you're like, there is something here, or was it a slower process for you?
My first exposure was CryptoKitties, and I wouldn't say immediate until I started looking at the code and understanding, oh, there's this shared data that anybody can build on top of them. I think that maybe the moment that it dawned on me when people were making the hats. I know it's the silliest thing. You have the what's that game on Steam? Basically, where like hats are like this gamer lore where you're just like, oh, we just put a hat on it and that makes it really fun. Team Fortress. And yeah, so when they started doing that in CryptoKitties, and you didn't need CryptoKitties approval to just do this thing, but then Dapper Labs didn't care because it was just adding value to their CryptoKitties. That's when it clicked. It's like, wait a second, you can have all these people building on top of your stuff, adding functionality, and you're happy about that. That fixes a lot of things in games. Right now, if you do that in games like mods and other things, those are kind of toxic to the original developer because they don't see any of that value. They only get maybe the original purchase, maybe. But if it's a free-to-play game, that can be a very toxic environment. So I think that was, definitely my aha moment. Hats.
Yeah, so interesting, right? Like something like this, like little triggers, right, along the way. Yeah, because CryptoKitties, I think for a lot of people in the space right now, like that was that initial thing, but it wasn't like a lot of people didn't cross that bridge. So it's always interesting to hear about. That's cool, really cool.
So one of the outstanding moments for me with Solana and NFTs, I think it was at NFT NYC. I just kind of was wandering around in the evening, got separated from the rest of our crew, and just hanging out at a kind of nice hotel bar where, of course, a bunch of crypto people were there because of the convention, and I just met a few people who were just jazzed about Solana. they were very kind of connected to this sort of brand, if you want to call it that, or the ethos. I felt a very strong community spirit. I think it was is Supducks, is that on Solana?
Ooh,
it was something ducks. It was something ducks. There was like a duck related
ducks. I don't know the exact
there's some duck related thing, and they were these two guys who just met because of this NFT project on Solana, and they could both be like really excited about it. So I guess we've seen, I haven't seen that kind of I'm sure it's there in different ways, kind of like a community spirit around Solana, almost like a grassroots kind of thing. I want to know, like, what do you think of as the trade-offs when you think of Solana and you compare it to other chain options, both inside and out of NFTs? I'm sure we could ask.
Yeah, let's see. So I definitely agree with you on the the community aspect, kind of what I was describing earlier, where you have these anybody's in and out of our ecosystem can come in and out of our offices and kind of work together. Web3 is, to me, I think outside of what lives in the consumer facing part, the company is actually a fascinating developments going on right now where everybody has the shared data and is building on that. And there's this composability because of that, that anybody's financially incentivized to find a gap in the ecosystem and work with the other people, which is drastically different than a Web2 company where you have some sort of like C-suite or whatever overlord saying, you build this, you build this, you build this. Maybe there's some competition, but most like you have, you fit within these very defined parameters, where in Web3, everybody's just financially incentivized to find their place. So that's pretty awesome. That's pretty universal. I guess for Solana, the reason why this is relevant is because everybody's trying to scale, and even Ethereum is trying to scale to meet the needs, but Solana is the only one who's doing it in a shared state. So anybody who mints on Solana or develops on Solana can use any programs from anybody else is developing. So if somebody comes up with some really cool liquidity sort of lending protocol or betting protocol or anything like that, anybody on the whole ecosystem can use it. You don't have to figure out how to copy and paste it to yours, which really matters for liquidity reasons, because if that protocol requires there to be some sort of liquidity pool attached to it, how do I bridge the right amount over relative to, you start running into a lot of issues when you start doing that, and especially in terms of like the utility of each of the NFTs. And then also just the way that our consensus mechanism works is it has a lot less forking. This gets really technical, but for the user point of view, it is time to finality. It feels very much like Web2, how quickly you can even buy an NFT and have it come to your wallet. There's less of that like terror of this spinny thing and having the network confirm it and all that stuff. It just happens so quickly when in the throughput. And part of the reason why that can be so quick is we're the only chain that I know of, at least, that does parallel computation on chain. So if two people are, if people are buying stuff or trading stuff or whatever they're doing, voting on things, and they're not accessing the same memory to do so. So maybe like you and I are trading, and then Josh and Jeff are trading. Those could be happening parallel on Solana, different threads basically, and that's how we scale with compute relative to other chains that are all inherently single-threaded because they don't have as tight a data model as we do. Now the trade-offs of that is that data model is slightly more complex. It's a much lower level language because you're having to program which allocations are where and kind of do kind of some serializations, deserialization, basically a bunch of hash tables. So it is a little bit, if you have to do on-chain programming, which a lot of times you don't have to do, by the way, we can get into that if you want to, but the execution is separated from the data. So if something's an executable, you actually don't have to redeploy. So most like NFTs, you don't have to copy and paste the core programming like you do on Open Zeppelin on the EVM world. So that's a positive. But the negative is if you do have to do some custom logic, it is a little bit more, you're managing more things. It's like kind of the difference between maybe C++ and C, whereas Rust and Solana is more like that lower level language. And then I guess there, between us and like the other scalable solutions that are doing shards, you have a little bit more configuration options on your specific shard. So if you wanted to sacrifice maybe some decentralization for more efficient cost or something like that, you can. Now, obviously Solana is very cheap in terms of transactions, but in order for all this very fast memory management and stuff, the rent is going to be a little bit cheaper than if you're managing only 40 nodes and like essentially a private network. You can have some of those, you can define some of those trade-offs in your subnet or your sidechain. So it just kind of depends on how much decentralization you want and how much do you want to be on the shared state with everything else. That's kind of the main like that cost, but the computation model is so efficient that we're even cheaper than side chains, just the way it works.
Thanks for that.
So yeah, compelling case for sure. So I had to take a moment here and note for your pleasure, Ethan. There are several duck-related projects on
Yeah, I'm
Solana.
sure.
I
Ducks are
got
popular. Apes are very
Dazed,
popular too, I hear. Yes.
Dazed
Yes.
ducks, Danger Valley ducks, Solana ducks, Soul ducks,
I think
and
it was Soul Ducks. That
was it?
sounds like
See,
it. Yeah.
Secret ducks, duck. Yeah, it goes on. It goes on. So, anything you can imagine.
Look out for Edge of NFT ducks.
Eventually it will satisfy rule 34 all on Solana.
Well, so Matt, besides the proliferation of duck projects, which I don't think is necessarily true in traditional gaming, there might be one or two duck games out there, but there's a lot of duck stuff going on. So a lot of fun concepts and projects and ways of sort of giving gamers more joy. I don't know what the word is for the joy of gaming, but that there should be a word for that, right? Like the joy of driving, the joy of gaming. But sort of when you look at that sort of spectrum of what's out there, how do you feel the current perception of blockchain gaming is shifting, and how does that influence your work at Solana? There's been a lot of different perspectives on blockchain gaming and how serious the traditional gaming industry is taking it. So maybe you can share your perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of avenues that we could take this conversation. I think there's some that are really well documented, like, you know, the amount of scams and kind of how early we are on. But there's another one that I kind of want to talk about that's a little bit more, I don't know, conceptual, that I think that you've kind of touched on in your opening and other things that I think would be great to talk about, which is games for a lot of people are an escape from the everyday life. And there is this worry that the minute you start adding real life exposure to that, then it becomes less of a game and more about, you know, things just necessarily become a job the moment there's any sort of capital or monetization in there. And there's nothing like, that's just a binary thing. There's nothing that the evolution of blockchain or any sort of change will happen that will change that fact once that goes in. So that one's, I think, is really interesting because it is just true. Now, I think the way we think about that is I don't think all games will necessarily need the same type of NFT integrations. So some of this is just a kind of a battle of pay to win versus, you know, different types of free to play, pay to win versus vanity content and stuff like that. But even the vanity content, even that, and right today, it is still a walled garden, and you just pay, and you pay some money and then you get a skin back and you can't trade it. Some people actually prefer that. And I know that's a very foreign concept for a lot of people listening right now. Why would people not want to own that skin that they got? But it is this entry of the normal life of, I don't want to become a marketplace when I enter a game. You know, I want this walled garden experience where I just want to consume when I enter this. I don't want to enter a movie experience where I have to make some decisions around that. Now, part of me, I think part of this is actually a bit of a difference in perspective around like the way marketplaces and kind of like how we interact with our stuff. So if you go up like an income bracket, wealthy people very rarely, even for entertainment stuff, spend a significant amount of their money or percentage of their money on something they can't resell, potentially even for more money. So there's this cultural difference there. Like if rich people spend it on houses and boats and cars and like all these things that they can actually resell pretty easily, where I think the lower levels are really used to not doing that. They one-off tickets or things that are so cheap that they don't really have a resale value even if they wanted to resell it. And so I actually think part of this is maybe switching the narrative a little bit, where once they start seeing that, hey, there actually is value in being able to resell some of the stuff that you once owned, then you can start seeing how it's not as toxic as you may think it is to be, you know, especially once the hype goes down. Right now we're in this kind of like, everything's so new and so hyped and everything's like so crazy that I can understand there's like some skepticism around the money. But, you know, let's say 5-10 years from now, you just kind of lower the difference between like a rich person owning something and a poor person owning something, or like, you know, that gap isn't as huge. And part of that's because you just lowered the friction at the lowest level from being able to actually, you know, get that back. And that ownership actually means something a lot more for your time. You can just put it up on a marketplace, and if anybody buys it, they buys it. And so you can actually have like a wider distribution of people who can, you know, get returns on their time. And that's like a pretty foreign concept today, because if I buy like $100 lawnmower, I'm not realistically reselling that very much. But this just kind of allows you to do that. And I think that is a very powerful concept. I think part of it's just seeing that being done successfully and kind of normalizing that in a way that's healthy. And I think the first step for that, the kind of way it affects our strategy at Solana Labs, is like the kind of the first, I think, major things that will take off, especially in the West, are actually user-generated content, because people are pretty comfortable giving money to creators. And if you're giving it to a creator who wouldn't have created that content maybe anyway unless you paid them, and it would have been kind of hard for them to create a whole company for like Roblox, for instance. A lot of the big creators in that have to make these big companies and do all this stuff. But if you put it on the blockchain, you can just have people collaborate, and everybody knows how much royalty they're going to get off that content. So I think that is kind of that concept has affected our strategy a lot.
It's pretty helpful to understand that context. I think a lot of folks don't think about all those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I guess it's also a lot of it is an outgrowth of how you're structured as a organization, that community-based, that foundation. And I'm curious, just to go back a little bit, you know, for a moment. So you have a lot of folks with like really legitimate, you know, Web 2 experience as, you know, executives or in that executive realm with big companies, and the structure of those companies, the processes, like the different positions that people have in those companies.
Exactly.
So I'm thinking like, what's the, you know, for folks that are really looking to build something, you know, sustainable, scalable, repeatable in this space, talk for a second about like your organizational structure around things like the boring stuff, the admin stuff. Like, how is this structured? Do you have a regular HR department? Do you have like, you know, how do you handle things like, you know, the vacation and employment offers and insurance and licensing and things like that? I mean, is there this layer, this foundational, this business layer that exists even in a company that is so Web3 and future oriented?
This is a fun question. One is really close to my heart. So I'm a two-town founder. And I have found in my career, I have a little bit of hard time working for like many layers of stuff above me that doesn't have very much clarity. Yeah. And working in Web3, you have a lot more clarity on what your incentives are and where you fit into that. And Solana Labs, we are not going to become a big organization almost at any scale of us. We're going to, if any one part of it gets too large, we're going to just set it off in its own entity with its, once it has those clear goals, it's going to become its own entity. We've just done this with Metaplex, for example, which is now a separate company that comes up with like NFT standards and other things, and is makes all these like plug and play, like white labeled solutions to making your own marketplaces. And so that's awesome. Like think that never happens. Almost the reverse happens in big Web 2 land, where there's just all these acquisitions, and you still see acquisitions for sure. But when you can maintain that lower size, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about doesn't need to exist as much. The incentives and the attribution is way more clear. It's not perfect. It's not like you get away from the fact that there is going to be some lack of clarity on who did what to get the actual outcome, but you're still much smaller, so it's way easier for you to understand which part of the organization came to what parts of the outcome. You don't need like entire like VP level looking around to make sure that the allocations are in the exact right spots as much. It's like that rule of 150. So as you kind of keep it these smaller groups, you can be way more nimble, and you can do way more per person because you don't have these layers of redundancy, or just, a bunch of people that don't even necessarily have a path. And then then, like I was saying earlier, all the sub teams that just kind of get created, or that are now companies instead of sub teams, they have the incentive to figure it out. You don't have to be an HR person, or some C-suite like telling them, oh, you need to iterate or whatever. They just they do it or they die. And then what's really cool about it is this is so new that even like the failure coast just means that you usually have tons of opportunities to go to one of the other companies that is doing well. So it's super healthy.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. Like, so let me ask real specifically though, if somebody wants to take a day off, is there a vacation policy? Is somebody enforcing a vacation policy, like very specifically?
I'm not going to say all Web3 companies have open vacation policies,
Yeah.
but everybody's just kind of, it's very, just like anything is flexible with, like everything is just so flexible. Like there's
Right.
weeks where I basically get up in the morning and like work the full week, like especially because we're in the middle of this kind of hacker month. So this month,
yeah.
it's been especially, I've just kind of like worked a lot. But then, if I want to take a Wednesday off, I don't really even ask anybody. No one's gonna, as long as I manage my schedule, everybody trusts me. So like I think that is awesome. That's the kind of like work style that like kind of gets me going, because I can optimize to like when I have certain inspiration to work.
Yeah, man. That's so cool. That's so interesting, man. So another aspect of it that's also really compelling is just this drive toward, sustainable blockchain development, right? And so Solana is right there at the leading edge of this. And I'm curious as to, the goals, the near-term goals and long-term goals Solana has around continuing that drive towards sustainability.
Do you mean in terms of the environment, or being able to have the economic incentives to develop even at maturity?
Let's say both, because I think both are relevant. Yeah.
Okay. The first one's pretty easy, actually. I think if blockchain started off as proof of stake, they wouldn't have had this association with the environmental impacts. A transaction on Solana is essentially like two Google searches is kind of the way we do it. But it's basically we've used up more energy. We're using up more energy in this call than we are like the blockchain itself running transactions. So it's just we also offset it, so we do care. Like this is one of the major reasons why I came to Solana, is just looking at how it scales and like how it will scale to the quantities that it will need to have Web2 type impact, and kind of competitive with NASDAQ and with gaming solutions and other things like that. So that's pretty, and we are coming up with actual validator, so like our nodes basically being economically incentivized, basically pay for carbon offsets and stuff like that built directly into the protocol. And we're playing around with some stuff like that and collecting a lot of feedback from validators, which is a really interesting thing. So basically, once you start having like this pool of resources for people who pay for carbon offsets, then you can and you can do it either through donations or through some small like percentage that people kind of pay into that's voted on by the ecosystem. You can offset the chain pretty easily. Like it's not very much money either. You're talking 5 figures a year. It's not necessarily because we run so efficiently.
Yeah, that's impressive.
The other topic I think is a very interesting one. Like you could argue that what is the economic incentive for Bitcoin developers to develop today? They would need a donation and things like that. And that one's also an interesting one. One is very similar to the concept I just said, where maybe the community would vote on the income of basically a percentage of validator income that would go towards Solana Labs or things like that. There's also potential for staking rewards, or just similar to other nonprofits where you would take donation based. The sky's kind of the limit there. We also potentially can come with a services organization, kind of like a Red Hat or something like that, where because we are are the main contributors to the chain, then we would have some, ability to also have a core competency to get paid for managed services. That one's a little less sexier to us, because we kind of want, like I was saying earlier, like I think we see some pretty realistic paths to each of the core systems that make up Solana to actually break off and just be separate entities over time, and even have some redundancy in those entities, and then just have attribution models that go to that and get paid out through a DAO. And it seems pretty realistic. And then they would just have their deliverables that they would deliver off to and get paid through the DAO for those deliverables. Very similar to bug bounties work today. They would just be deliverable bounties.
Right on. Yeah, it got such a critical part of the whole thing to keep it going, to keep it evolving, to keep it developing as things change over time. If those incentives are misaligned, right, then where does it go?
Exactly.
Nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, of course, one of the things we see with blockchains also is it's not sustainable if you're kind of just internal, right? I mean, you got to build partnerships. You got to help other people build the ecosystem with you.
Yep.
So that's why you see these various chains, helping to support the NFT projects, for example, that want to build on them and things like that. So on that note, any partnerships you guys are excited about, you want to, tell us about what's already going on, things you want to announce and share. What's up in the partnerships department?
Wow. Well, there's awesome things happening.
We know there's going to be a partnership with Edge of NFT ducks, but we can talk about that later.
Yes. Yeah. We can show that one as much. One that just came out today that we're really excited about, Angelic announced their fundraising round in Solana Ventures was part of it, and they're building on Solana. It's a game. It's a AAA quality kind of team tactics base game. It's amazing. I play tested it a lot. I actually still play it. It's got a lot of replayability because they have a bunch of basically challenges within it, like using which units, and because some of them are more powerful than others, and they have a bunch of things around scores. So it's got a lot of replayability, and you can do things like put achievements on chain and like get different units. So that one's really cool. AAA studio out of Turkey. And then there's a bunch of other ones. I'm trying to think about what I can talk about today. There's just so much going on. It's hard to remember like what.
Yeah, you can talk about all of the things. Like if you just want to list for us like the things that you can't talk about, just go for that first. Just get them out of the way so we can make sure we know what you're not supposed to talk about.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
I think one of the other thing that's so related to the economic incentive of having awesome builders. Another good example is Fractal coming on to Solana. So Justin Kahn, former co-founder of Twitch, chose a chain to launch on, and it was Solana. And part of that's because we don't compete with that, that market. And so they are doing a lot of really, really cool things that are gamer focused marketplace stuff. And we are happy to be in a shared Slack and help them contribute. And but yeah, they're definitely a separate entity and doing a lot of really cool things in this space. We're also really excited about cross-platform future. So obviously they'll, eventually take other, games and other things in other ecosystems. Because they're a platform. But let me think about Shaq's the Australis. So Shaq has a NFT that just dropped a few days ago. That was very funny.
Nice.
He's awesome. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, maybe that's a good segue to a question I had for you, which is sort of looking ahead. What should we expect from the world of Solana in terms of gaming and NFTs the rest of this year?
Yeah. So my sense of this is that studios that are very interested in the user experience and making the best game and monetization as part of that are choosing Solana. So it's a lot of people who are just very interested in performance, very interested in having their users building a great game and not having any friction anywhere else. So that just a lot of people are building on Solana, and a lot of really seasoned game makers are building on Solana because they want to be at a place where they can concentrate on the game and they don't have to battle with the underlying technologies that they're using in order to provide a good user experience. And Solana just gives you that out of the box. We have like a lot of things that are just plug and play, especially in terms of minting NFTs. That's why 8 million have been minted, because a lot of people can mint them. It's not exactly hard. And then yeah, so there's some very big, very exciting games. You'll hear some announcements going on, but there's anything from these like really hardcore MMOs and battle royales and like very tight economic games, all the way to nice, just fun experiences that are you can kind of mint your achievements and mint other aspects of it. And so I think that's what gets me excited, is the fact that there is a lot of diversity coming onto Solana, because it's pretty, it's just a base level of data and computation. So it doesn't really lend itself to one versus the other more than anything of that. It's just a great place to mint NFTs.
I'm just kind of curious, is there like an equivalent version of you in other divisions of Solana, thinking about the future of Solana when it applies to like regenerative agriculture and B2B cases and maybe some of the other use cases for like music and whatnot? Like, do you have peers kind of thinking about all these other use cases for Solana?
Yeah, definitely. Gaming touches basically everything, just like, because it's a bit entertainment, it's a bit content. It's also very high tech, also audio, also all these things. That's the beauty of gaming, and that's why kind of gaming is just starting to lose its term. Actually, it's just becoming
so
a bunch
they all
of
report to you.
Different. Actually, sort of. We have like a cross-discipline tech team, and I run that. But I concentrate on games just because that's games are a fantastic place to get, because our main goal is to get 1 billion users having a great time, self-signing, like basically owning their wallets, self-custody on Solana. And so gaming is one of the fastest ways of getting us there. So it's not management. So again, it's very different than Web3. Like I run the kind of like the make the collaboration and make sure across disciplines, and we're communicating with each other so that we can scale a lot of the things that are happening and then compute.
Yeah, I guess another way of asking, is there something that's sort of a little bit outside the traditional definition of gaming sort of happening this year that you're excited about, sort of in like the B2B space or the entertainment space, maybe that just doesn't fit sort of the overall context of the podcast, as we've discussed sort of the gaming use case of Solana?
Yeah, I mean, Solana Pay is, I think, a very interesting case, because it allows you to basically do normal point of sale with receipts and itemized, all that stuff, just in a transaction. It's maybe not as sexy, I guess, of what you're asking. But one of the really cool things that we're thinking about is a lot of this combined collaboration. So built into our actual protocol, you can have multiple royalty givers. But one of the things that's like next layer on top of that is, how do you combine people who weren't necessarily part of the original asset, the original like PFP, for example, and they can still contribute. And maybe the original asset people sign off and say, yes, this is part of my collection. And so instead of one PFP, maybe you have a folder of assets that all fit that PFP. So you have an audio attached to it, you have an animation, you have 3D asset, you have various qualities of 3D assets attached to it. So you then start thinking, that's where you start thinking about its interoperability with a bunch of stuff. So you could have like the Roblox version of your Bored Ape, and you don't necessarily have to make it either. Somebody else could just make it for you, and you just, as the owner of the Bored Ape, or the certifying entity, would just say, yes, this is part of the collection. You have options for doing that. So I think that's kind of related, because the sky's the limits with that. Who knows what people are going to be creating within that paradigm? It's going to be audio. It's going to be, I don't even know, holographic, I don't know, images, and I don't know, whole cinematics. Who knows? Yeah.
Very cool.
Nice, dude. But look, outside of the Solana universe, like where do you like really feel like there are points of inspiration for you? Like what gets you jazzed outside of just your kind of day to day,
Oh, wow. I mean, I think I'm technologist. So the things that really get me excited, I guess, are various things that are happening in machine learning. So I came from Unity, where I headed up a team that was doing reinforcement learning. So teaching things how to play games. And so the part of the reason why I went to blockchain is kind of this decentralization of way of getting knowledge. And I think that can really help reinforcement learning in a lot of ways. It gets really technical, but that's one place that actually kind of inspires me, is how do you get more information and enable more things to provide information. I guess the other one, honestly, is like, I don't know if it's inspiration for what I do day to day, but just things around like gene editing and CRISPR. I think that's just potentially going to fundamentally change the way that we as humans live. And not that I think we should be generating our own DNA just yet. That's pretty scary, because once it's in there, it's hard to get it out there. But just like in terms of like therapies and other things, and the way we grow our crops and other things like that, I think those are some fantastic things. And so I think the way it doesn't exactly relate to what I do day to day, but it does relate to once you, the more and more things that you can enable people to have the appropriate incentives to do creative things, and that's like what blockchain allows, then you have more and more people who could be creating on these other things. So I don't know, 5 years from now, I might be able to produce a gene sequence that's awesome, and I can just put it up to the open bidder and or whatever paradigm I want to do, and people could just maybe pay per use of it or whatever. Same way with a machine learning model. Somebody could just have some really novel machine learning model, put it up on a blockchain for somebody to use, and spend $1 each usage or whatever. So imagine if like GTP3 was just pay per use on the blockchain. Then it would just go up to the open bidder, and then you could do a bunch of really cool things around open access. And that doesn't necessarily need to be like Microsoft's OpenAI that made it. It could just be some person who made it. And so you, as an individual, like technologist like me, I don't have to worry about some large hierarchy of anything. I just need to find where my model might be able to serve a purpose, and just put it up there, give some open examples of how it's doing something good, and everybody can see it. And then once you kind of prove that in an open way, people will be able to use it. And so I think that's kind of what inspires me, is as getting to those kind of open usage of everything.